less than 10 seconds.
Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Where in the Solar System, where we are going to journey out into the solar system and do some crafting. In order to do that, we have to find Morgan, who is out there in the world, out there in the solar system. Hello Morgan, how's it going?
Hello, I'm good. I'm out here in the world, as you were saying, which feels really nice to get back to some normalcy. How are you at home?
Yeah, no, I'm getting a bit squirrely out here, but we do have some upcoming in-person events at the Space Center, which I'm really excited about. Hopefully, if you're out there and watching these videos, check our website. We've had a couple so far. We've got a few more planned. For the rest of the summer, we're going to be doing outdoor events like making rockets, looking through the telescope, things like that. But this week, speaking of looking through the telescope, we can look at the world that is closest to us, the only world that humans have ever been on besides the Earth. That, of course, is the moon. So how did you do this week with thinking about crafts around the moon?
There's so many out there, so many that sound like so much fun too. But again, we're trying to make everything very accessible for people stuck at home like you. So we went with something called the Puffy Paint Moon Craft, which really involves making a three-dimensional sort of moon where you can explore all of the craters that make the moon so beautiful to look at from here on Earth.
Nice. And as you were contemplating the moon, did you ever like go outside and like check out the moon, kind of just like soak it in and think about the moon in a different way?
I'm actually one of those weirdos that constantly walks around at night on a nice clear night, like with my head up in the clouds like this, staring at the moon all the time. So I can't necessarily recall whether I did this specific week more than others, but I do. And this week we had a lunar eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't any old lunar eclipse, was it?
Well, no, what's interesting, so there was actually a solar eclipse actually in the world, and quite often what happens is when we have a solar eclipse, there'll also be a lunar eclipse centered closely by it. Of course, here in the west coast of Canada, we weren't able to see the solar eclipse, so it was a non-event. And the lunar eclipse also was something that you'd have to get up really early in the morning to see. And of course, it was not a total lunar eclipse. It was what we call a penumbral lunar eclipse, which is less exciting. But in order to think about what a penumbral lunar eclipse means, we have to think about that word penumbral and what that means. So essentially what it means is the shadow of a shadow. And this could be like a really interesting experiment. So right now I'm looking behind you, Morgan, and I can sort of see this shadow right under your ear. There's something there. The light is coming down. It's creating a shadow. Okay. Now that dark part of the shadow, that's sort of like the deepest part of the shadow, but that right on the edges, the shadow, as you can see, gets kind of lighter. That is what we call the penumbra. It's sort of like the shadow of the shadow. It's just sort of like the edges there where it's not quite the shadow, but the shadow itself is sort of fading out. So the Earth, instead of going into that deep part of the shadow, which we would call sort of like part of the lunar eclipse, it just kind of like goes into that penumbra area. So you'd have to have a really keen eye, I think, to when you're looking at the moon to like notice that it is now in, this penumbra shadow. It's very subtle. If you do, if you're ever used to looking at, penumbral eclipses, you might notice it, but I think for the layperson, it might be a bit difficult. But I do really enjoy looking at total lunar eclipses. I think they're really beautiful because normally when you're looking at the moon, it's so bright. All of that sunlight is reflecting up the surface. And of course, the moon, as I have my little thing here, it's very gray. So it reflects a lot of light, which is why it's so bright up in our sky. But when it goes into the shadow, all of that direct light is not hitting the moon anymore. It's just bending around the Earth. And so it's kind of like a sunset. The light gets scattered. It becomes a little bit more deeper red, like when you see the sun go over the horizon. So all of that sort of like that sunsetty color, that sort of like a deep red goes onto the moon. It's not like super dramatic, but it's very sort of like very subtle and very beautiful, in my opinion.
I agree. I love a nice lunar eclipse too, but we don't get them so often.
Nice.
So.
Well, this sounds like a really, really fun activity. So hopefully anyone out there that's going through making this beautiful art, please send pictures. You can tweet at us at Space Center YVR, or we're also on Instagram at Space Center YVR. We'll be back next week. From Michael from my kitchen here, and from Morgan out there at UBC doing your experiments. See you next week.
Bye, guys.
Hello, everybody. We're super excited to be learning all about the moon this week in celebration of the Lunar Rover's anniversary. So many people know that mission Apollo 15 was one of the first where we sent a rover up to the moon with NASA's space program. On July 20th, 1969, history was made when astronauts aboard Lunar Module Eagle became the first people to land on the moon. 6 hours later, mankind took its first lunar steps. Decades prior to that monumental moment, researchers at the United States Space Agency were already looking ahead and toward the creation of a vehicle that would be up to the task of enabling astronauts to explore what many assumed would be a vast and challenging landscape. Initial studies for a lunar vehicle had been well underway since the 1950s, and in 1964, an article was published in Popular Science about NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center director, who was giving preliminary details on how such a vehicle might work. Perhaps not so coincidentally, that was also the year that scientists at the Marshall Center started work on the first concept for a moon vehicle. MOLAB, which stands for Mobile Laboratory, was a 2-man, 3-ton closed cabin vehicle with a range of 100 kilometers. A whole bunch of other ideas were also looked at until eventually they settled on the Lunar Rover that was sent up to space in 1969 aboard Apollo 15. Now, at the end of July, we're looking at sending a rover up to Mars. This mission, called Mars 2020, is sending the rover Perseverance to seek signs of ancient life and collect rock and soil samples for possible return to Earth. The launch window was initially set to be July 17th to August 15th, but has since been revised to July 30th to August 15th, and will take a flight from Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida. This rover will land on February 18th, 2021 at Jezero Crater on Mars, and it will stay on Mars for at least 1 Mars year, which is about 687 Earth days. To celebrate these historical events, we are going to be doing an activity today called Puffy Paint Mooncrafting. Now, Puffy Paint Mooncrafting is excellent for recreating the moon in a fun, hands-on way because the paint, as suggested by the title, becomes kind of puffy and three-dimensional. It's got a lot of structure to it because we use shaving cream and sticky glue, and you can color it using some food coloring or markers or other paints and glitter, of course, if you have those things on hand. Without further ado, let's get right into it. As always, the first thing we want to do is collect all of our materials at our workbench. So today we're going to need a mixing bowl, a measuring cup, some foamy shaving cream. You want the foam variety, not the gel variety, and some drippy glue. I'm using Elmer's drippy glue here. I've just got it in a small test tube because my larger volume of it is just drying up a little bit, so I split it into smaller tubes to keep it fresh. You're also going to want a cardboard stencil or cardboard that you can work directly on. If you don't want to work on the cardboard, you can work on another piece of paper which you stencil out with a cardboard stencil according to the moon phase that you want to recreate today. So if you go back a few videos to our tides video, you will see that we made a moon phase viewer which goes through all of the different phases of the moon in great detail. I won't repeat those today. I'm simply going to do the full moon. It's my favorite phase. I feel a little bit crazy when there's a full moon going on, as many people might say. So yeah, I'm just going to stick with that one today. I also don't have my markers or my glitter or any food coloring available at my house since we're trying to discourage people from going out to the stores in order to complete these activities. I'm not going to use any of that today. If you have them on hand, please do. Otherwise, you'll just have a white puffy paint moon, which is just as good as a colorful one, really. So what you want to do is use 1 part drippy glue to 3 parts shaving cream. So I'm going to measure out a 1/4 cup of my drippy glue. and dispense this into my mixing bowl. And I'm going to use my fingers to mix. It's going to be messy. We're just going to get right in there. If you don't want to get the puffy paint on your working space, perhaps you don't have a workbench dedicated to these crafts as I do, then you're going to want to put out newspaper ahead of time. We don't really care about this workspace here, so we're not doing that, but to each their own. Next, you want to dispense 3/4 of a cup of the Foamy shaving cream into your measuring cup and into the mixing bowl. And now, like we said, we really want this nice and foamy. The gel variety of shaving cream doesn't work quite as well as the foamy variety does. And it's kind of hard to measure out accurately because it is a foam. So we're just going to kind of do the best we can, use our fingers, get it right in there. And now we're going to take our mixing claw, which is making another appearance. We haven't seen the mixing claw since video number 1 when we made paper mache. And we're just going to mix together our shaving cream and our glue until we get a nice structured sort of puffy paint looking thing. Now you're going to feel it sort of glop together. You can play around with it in your hands. You'll see it coming together like so. And if you want to dispense your puffy paint onto your moon stencil in a more sort of organized way, you can use a plastic sandwich bag as a piping bag. And you can actually decorate your moon pretty beautifully. You can create craters to emulate the moon's surface better. You can do a whole bunch of stuff. I can attach in the PDF Instructable some links for some inspiration, but we really just encourage you to get creative and use your own sort of artistic expression, as we call it, to come up with an idea yourself. So now we've got our puffy paint. It's very, very puffy. It's very gloopy. And our hands are nice and glooped up. We're having fun while we mix. You can't really stop doing this process until fun has been had. And once it has, then you're ready just to spread this mixture right onto your moon, or what is going to be your moon. So I'm going to take my piece of cardboard, and I don't want the puffy paint to be too thick on my own. So I'm just going to use a piece that I've created today. This recipe makes up enough to do several puffy paint moons if you want it to. So yeah, you don't have to use it all by any means, unless you want your moon to be very three-dimensional and very thick. If you were to use food coloring in order to decorate your moon with color, you would have wanted to add that before spreading it onto the cardboard stencil, because of course you want the food coloring to be fully incorporated in your puffy paint, and it makes a really, really beautiful sort of tie-dye effect on your moon as well, which is really excellent. If you're going to use other paints or markers or glitter, you can wait until actually this part of the protocol now, where after you've spread it onto your cardboard stencil and made it sort of textural and nice and structured, then you can add your other decorations. And so again, we don't want this to be perfectly smooth. The moon surface has lots of craters, lots of peaks and valleys. So really just kind of get it on there, make it three-dimensional and beautiful like this. And then if you're going to use markers or other paints, you want to set this aside to dry for at least 8 hours at 20 degrees Celsius. If it's a cooler day, you're going to require more time. And I've run into problems before where even on a nice warm day, above 20 degrees Celsius, that my puffy paint moon isn't quite dry after 8 hours. So I would actually recommend leaving it to dry overnight before proceeding with more decorations. But really, that's it. Like, it's pretty easy, it's pretty fun, and we've got all this leftover puffy paint that we can do whatever we want with, really. Have you ever wondered what makes foamy shaving cream foamy? What exactly about it is so different from the gel kind of foaming cream that dispenses as a gel before foaming up? A lot of people think that the aerosolization process associated with putting the shaving cream into the can is what gives it its foamy nature. Many others think that it is some sort of immediate reaction with the oxygen in the atmosphere and the chemicals in the shaving cream that make it foam. But neither groups of people are actually correct. So I looked into this a little bit when I was preparing this activity. I wanted to know a little bit of the chemistry behind puffy paint, and I discovered that, in fact, stearic acid and triethanolamine, two chemicals found in the foaming shaving cream, is what gives it its extra creamy and dense lather. This two reagents combined with a propellant such as butane or propane of some sort expands and instantly evaporates when it leaves the can, filling the foam with its millions of bubbles. So as some of the reagents evaporate, they bubble up, sort of like carbon dioxide did in our rocket in last week when we combined vinegar and baking soda. And the bubbles make the foam expand and give it its creamy, lathery goodness. There you have it. Some chemistry, some moon, some space. We covered it all, and I can't wait to see you guys next week. Thanks for tuning in. Please send us any photos that you might have of your completed moon crafts after they've dried and you've decorated them. We love seeing what you guys come up with each week. Until next time.